Hi there, my name is Julia Greider and I'm one of the librarians here at RCC. And in this video, we're going to be talking about how you can avoid plagiarism and properly cite your sources in MLA format. So why do we cite? Why do we need to have those citations in our papers? Why is this even important? For one thing, we need to avoid plagiarism. And plagiarism is the practice of taking someone else's work or ideas and passing them off as one's own. So plagiarism is essentially when you are writing a paper and you use ideas or words from another piece of research that you're looking at, and you don't give credit to the author of that work that you are using in your paper. That is considered plagiarism. So by including citations in our papers, we can give credit to the people who did the work that we are using for our papers, and then we're not plagiarizing because we are giving credit to the people who created those ideas. Additionally, providing citations in your paper just allows your reader to know where you got your information from in case they want to do more research into the topic or get a better understanding of the sources that you were using to create the work that you created. So how do we avoid plagiarism? Besides just, doing citations, here are a few tips. First of all, when you're using somebody else's work in your paper, when you're citing a source, you can either paraphrase their words, meaning that you take the information from the source that you're using and put it into your own words, or you can use quotes from the original source that you're using. And when you use a quote, that means that you're taking the exact words that are written in the source. And when you quote, you have to put quotation marks around those words that you're taking from the source. Those quotation marks indicate that the words are not your own and you're taking them from someone else. But maybe the most important thing to remember here is that whether you are paraphrasing or quoting in your paper, you need to provide a citation for that information. Because even if you are paraphrasing the information and not using the words of the other author, you're still using their ideas and you still got the information from that other person. So you still need to give them credit for those ideas in your paper. Additionally, you need to make sure to provide citations both in the text of your paper, so after each sentence that uses information from a source, and you also need to cite on your works cited page at the end of the paper. And in a second, we're going to talk about the difference between those two types of citations and how they relate to each other. Basically, the good rule of thumb is just to remember to cite literally anything that you didn't already know before you started working on the paper. So anything that didn't come from your own head when you were writing. And it's generally better to cite too much than too little. Like, you're rarely going to run into issues with having too many citations. That just doesn't really happen. So always err on the side of having a lot of citations. And here's a little meme for you. Just remember, everyone gets a citation. So now we're looking at a sample paper written in MLA format. This comes from the OWL at Purdue website, which we'll be looking at a little bit later on in this video as well. And all of the boxes on this paper are just comments to help you know how to format your paper. So we're going to scroll down until we start seeing some in-text citations here on page 3. The in-text citations are these things in parentheses at the ends of sentences. And they indicate which source the information in the previous sentence is coming from. So you'll notice they have a person's last name and a number in these parentheses. The person's last name is the last name of the person who created that source that was used to write the previous sentence. And the number is a page number that indicates which page in the source that that person wrote the information is coming from. So let's take this example of this in-text citation that says Danhoff 7. So with just that information, it's pretty hard to know where this information in the previous sentence came from, right? This isn't super descriptive. But with this person's last name, we can go down to the works cited page at the very bottom of the paper, and we can find this source written by Danhoff right here. And this is called the reference, and it includes more information about the source than we see in the in-text citation. So here we have the title of the book written by Danhoff, the publisher of that book, and the year of publication. So with all of this information, we could pretty easily go to a library and find the book and go to page 7, which was cited in the in-text citation, and find exactly where this person was getting their information from for that sentence. So this is essentially how the in-text citations work in relation to the references. You provide an in-text citation after each sentence where you're using information from a source, and then your reader can go down to the works cited page and find the full reference for that source if they want to go look it up themselves. All right, so the next few slides are going to be referring to this pretend resource that we're going to be pretending that we have used for a paper that we are writing. And this resource says, in a survey of 200 community college students, when participants were asked to rank their favorite dessert out of a list of 10 options, ice cream sundaes were by far the top-ranked dessert out of all choices presented. And this is theoretically coming from an article called Popularity of Desserts, written by me and published in 2019. Here are some examples of in-text citations that we could create from that passage from the resource on the previous slide. And the top 2 examples here are examples of how we might paraphrase that passage. Just a reminder, paraphrasing is when you put the passage into your own words and use the information from the source in your paper, but you're not using any exact words from the source. So there are 2 different ways that we can cite this in the text of our paper. One is to include the author's last name in the sentence, like in this first example here, where we say Grider proved in her study that blah, 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 blah. And then at the end of the sentence, we have to include the page number in parentheses. Then in the second example, we're not including the author's name within the sentence itself, so we need to include it in the parentheses at the end of the sentence, along with the page number. Basically, no matter what, you have to have the author's last name and the page number somewhere in the sentence. So both of these examples do that, just in slightly different ways. And then the second 2 examples here are examples of quoting from the source. So as a reminder, that's when we are using exact words from the source. And you'll notice that both instances here include those quotation marks to indicate which words have been taken directly from the source. In the first example of a quotation, we have both pieces of information we need in parentheses at the end of the sentence, the author's last name and the page number, both in parentheses. Then in our final example, we again are integrating the author's name into the sentence, saying Grider proved that, blah, blah, blah. So then we just need to include that page number in parentheses at the end. So let's do a little exercise to give you some practice with how all of this works. For the next few slides, on the left-hand side, you're going to see that passage we were just looking at from the pretend source about the dessert survey. On the right-hand side, you're going to see an example of how someone might use that passage in an essay. And it's up to you to determine whether or not the person who's using that passage in their essay has done so correctly, or if maybe they are doing something that they are not allowed to do, potentially even plagiarizing. So I want you to pause the video here for a second, read both the original and the example of how it might be used in an essay, and try to determine whether you think it's being used correctly in the essay or if there's something off. So this example is incorrect. We cannot use a source like this in an essay. And the reason for that is the words are exactly the same in the original source and in the essay. And there are no quotation marks being used in the essay. So this is essentially an instance where the writer is quoting directly from the original source. And because of that, they need to include those quotation marks around all of the words that are being taken from the original source. So this whole passage should have quotation marks around it. And those quotation marks would indicate correctly that the words are written by someone else. It does have a proper citation at the end of the passage in the essay here. It says Grider 15 in parentheses, but we do need those quotation marks to indicate that the words are taken exactly from the original. All right, here's our next example. Here in our essay, it says, one study showed that students at community colleges picked ice cream sundaes as the top ranked dessert out of all choices presented from a list of 10 options. Grider 15. So go ahead and pause the video again and determine whether you think this is a permissible way to use the source in an essay. So this is kind of a tricky one. The answer is no, we cannot use this source in an essay in this manner. And the reason is this is kind of an example of someone trying to paraphrase a source and not totally getting there, which happens quite a lot because paraphrasing can be difficult. So essentially, at the beginning of this sentence in the essay, it starts out pretty well. One study showed that students at community colleges picked ice cream sundaes. That's all pretty paraphrased, like none of that's really coming directly from the original. But then we say, as the top ranked dessert out of all choices presented from a list of 10 options. And as the top ranked dessert, or the top ranked dessert at least, that comes directly from the original source. Also, out of all choices presented comes directly from the original source, and a list of 10 options also comes directly from the original source. These phrases have all been sort of rearranged in the essay, but they are still being taken directly from that original source. So it's not really successfully paraphrased. We're still sort of accidentally quoting certain phrases without including those quotation marks. Once again, we do have a proper citation at the end, but still, because it's not entirely paraphrased, this might be considered plagiarism. So we would want to go back if this was our essay and do a more complete job of rewording this passage so that it's really entirely in our own words and not taking words directly from the original source. One tip for paraphrasing is to read the source, make sure you really understand everything that it's saying, and then put it away and don't look at it at all while you're writing your essay or while you're writing whatever it is that's using information from that source. That can help you put the source into your own words entirely and not accidentally take phrases from that original source. So next example here, in the essay, we're saying one prominent study proved that in a survey, quote, ice cream sundaes were by far the top ranked dessert. Go ahead and pause your video again and determine whether or not you think this is a proper use of the source in our essay. So the answer here is also no, and that's because there's no citation included in the essay this time. There are the proper quotation marks around the passage that's being taken directly from the original source, so that's great, but there's no citation to show where those words are coming from. So to the reader, it's still pretty unhelpful because they know we took the words from somewhere, but they don't know where we took them from. So we would need to include a citation in parentheses to show where this quote is coming from. All right, our next example here says one prominent study proved that in a survey, quote, ice cream sundaes were by far the top ranked dessert, Grider 15. Pause the video again and take a look at this one. Finally, this one is correct because we've properly put the quotation marks around the passage taken directly from the original source, and we've also included that citation at the end of the sentence that shows our reader where that quotation is coming from. So this is perfect. Final example here. One prominent study proved that the preferred dessert of community college students is an ice cream sundae, Grider 15. Go ahead and pause the video again and take a look at this one. This one is also correct. This is an example of a successful paraphrase where the writer has entirely put that original passage into their own words. They aren't including all of the details from that original passage, but they are getting the main ideas across, which might be all that they need for their paper. And they've also included a citation at the end of the sentence in parentheses, because remember, even if you're paraphrasing, even if you're putting it into your own words and not quoting directly, you still have to include that in-text citation to show where the information itself is coming from. So here's just an overview of how in-text citations are different from references. In-text citations are what we've been looking at for the last few slides. They're those citations that go in the body of your paper as you're writing after each sentence where you quote from a source or use any other information from a source. And they're a shortened form of the longer reference that goes at the end of the paper. So again, for the in-text citations, you're going to include the author's last name and the page number where the information came from in parentheses at the end of the sentence. One quick note also that the in-text citation goes before the period at the end of the sentence. So you'll have your sentence, your citation, and then the period after the parentheses. The references, on the other hand, go at the end of the paper on the works cited page, which is its own page. And they're going to be listed alphabetically by whatever the first word of the reference is. It's usually going to be the author's last name, but not always. And it gives all of the information about the source that someone would need to be able to go and find it on their own. Basically, when you're writing your citations, there are two things you need. One is the information about the source. So that's going to be things like the author's name, the title of the work, the publisher, the date of publication. That's the information that you get from the source. Then you have to combine that information with the formatting rules that are laid out by the citation format that you're using. And for this class, you're going to be using MLA format. MLA stands for Modern Language Association, and that's basically just a group that dictates what rules we have to use for our citations and how they should be formatted so that everyone's on the same page. When you put that information about the source into the format that MLA tells us to use, then you end up with your proper citations and references. When you're writing your citations, it's really important to pay close attention to the little details of the formatting, because that's really what makes the format what it is. So particularly take note of things like what letters are capitalized, where the punctuation goes, and what goes in italics, because those are the things that often will trip people up. Next, we're going to take a look at a brief handout that I've created to help you write your MLA citations. You can access this handout from the research guide for your class. On the Citing Sources tab, there's a link to the condensed MLA guide, which is what we're going to be looking at next. I'll include a link for this web page in the description of the video so that you can access it easily. This is what the handout looks like. It's just one page long, so it's really just a short and sweet introduction to MLA format. This is certainly not everything you're ever going to need to know about MLA format, but I'm hoping that it can be a helpful introduction and a go-to spot for you to get help with your citations. So here at the top, we have the same information we were looking at earlier with those examples of different in-text citations you can create from our pretend resource we were using. Then on the second half of the page, I have information about how to format references for different types of sources. So one thing to know about writing your references is that the format is going to be slightly different depending on what type of source you're using. If you're using an academic journal article, a book, a website, a video, an audio recording, anything you can think of, they're going to have slightly different citation formats. On this handout, I've only included the format for these three types of sources just because I was trying to keep it short, but I'll also show you where you can go to find information about citing other types of sources. Finally, at the bottom of this handout, there's a bit of information about what to do when there are multiple authors of a source. So if more than one person worked on it, you have to do some special things to give credit to all of the authors in the proper way. So in this In these examples of formatting your references, I first have a general format example with generic words in here to tell you what you need to be including, such as the title of the article, the title of the journal. And then I have an example of what that looks like when you actually put in that information. Now, if you need more detailed explanations of how to write these citations, or if you're looking for how to write a citation for a source type that's not listed on this page, you can always use this link at the top to go into the OWL at Purdue website. That's where we're going to go next. So the OWL at Purdue stands for the Online Writing Lab at Purdue University, and this is a great resource for anything you may need when you're doing citations. If you scroll down on this page, you'll find some general guidelines for the formatting of your paper in MLA format. And you'll also find on the left-hand side a whole list of how to do citations for different types of sources. So for instance, if you need more information about citing journal articles or magazines or newspapers, you're going to want to click on periodicals. That's a word that references all of those types of things that are published periodically. If you need information about citing websites, you can go to electronic sources. Things like YouTube videos would also be included under electronic sources. And basically, you can find any type of source you may be wondering about if you click through these pages. They also have that sample paper down here. That's what we were looking at earlier in the video. And that can be really helpful for getting a better understanding of how all of this works together to come to a final product. I just want to remind you that if you're using the Opposing Viewpoints in Context database for your research, you can also get an automatically generated citation for your works cited page. Whenever you're looking at an article in Opposing Viewpoints in Context, in the upper right, you'll see this Cite button with a quotation mark symbol. And if you click on that, you'll see an automatically generated citation for the article, which you can simply copy and paste into your works cited page. If you're using any other database provided by the library, you'll also find a Cite button somewhere on the page, but it might not be in quite this exact spot. If you'd like to talk further about how to do citations, or if you'd like some individual help with your citations for this final paper, always feel free to contact me. My information is in the research guide over on the left-hand side. There's a big email me button, and I'll also include my email in the description of this video if you'd like to contact me. Good luck with your citations, and I hope to hear from you.